Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of The Backstory on Marketing. If you haven't already done so, please visit ProRelevant.com and sign up for all of these episodes and podcasts. I am the author of the just released book, The Post-COVID Marketing Machine, Prepare Your Team to Win. You can find more information on this at marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Today, we'll be speaking with Teresa Caro. She is passionate about how new media and technologies create opportunities for brands and impact the overall customer experience. Teresa is a sought-after thought leader. Both an author and speaker, Teresa has been quoted in leading publications like Harvard Business Review, USA Today, NPR, and Forbes on how businesses can succeed in an evolving digital marketplace. She speaks at numerous marketing events, including CMO US, Media Post, and AdTech. Her work has been recognized by leading awards such as Cannes Lion, Clio Awards, One Show, Effie Awards, and Radio Mercury. Teresa worked with leading publicist group agencies such as Razorfish and Moxie before joining now the Johnson Group as president, now in 2022. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Really appreciate it. And you've certainly got a great background. And so definitely looking forward to our chat. So tell us a little bit more about how you got into marketing.
Well, I sort of fell into it. And yes, I'm going to admit how old I am. In the early 90s, and as we discussed last night, Guy, and your book launch, in the early 90s on the East Coast and potentially the Midwest, going through some difficult times. And so graduating school, I just took the first job that I could find. Thankfully, it was with Ford Motor Company. But I realized very quickly that from a sales perspective, that wasn't my jam. And working with consultants and talking to a lot of people, I realized that I loved supporting the sales process through marketing, not so much being the front end of it. So thus was born my marketing career. From there, I discovered that I love brands. I've worked with a lot of great brands, but I love the energy and the excitement and the diversity of advertising agencies. So as you look through my resume, my LinkedIn profile, you'll see various things that I've done throughout my career, but I keep coming back to the advertising agency world. And I'm excited that Joe Johnson has invited me to help him lead his organization of 26 years, the Johnson Group.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were just named the president of the Johnson Group, but also the chief dragon slayer, it looks like. So tell us about Johnson Group and how you're going to slay some great dragons.
Well, we definitely love slaying our giants. Yes, we are an advertising and marketing firm. We have been around for 26 years. And you may think with us, and yes, it says it right here, you may think that giant slaying means that we help small brands compete against the big brands. And that's really the analogy of David and Goliath, and that how we use that. But in reality, if you look at the story between the giant and David, this is really a huge challenge that everyone was afraid to tackle, right? And then David comes along with a very simple, creative solution and slays the giant, right? And that's what the Johnson Group has been doing for over 2 decades, really working with key brands, leaders in their space, and figuring out who are their giants. Who do they need to slay? And how do we come up with creative ideas to go about doing it? So it's very exciting that I'm able to join such a well-established organization and help take them to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the analogy with David and Goliath, kind of the young upstart versus the entrenched big leader. And what's interesting when you think about Goliath and the bigger brands, and as a small brand, you're always afraid of the big brands because you think they're just going to crush you, but they're also just stuck in their own momentum. And you really do have the opportunity to slay dragons. And so I really like that analogy.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, we work with some of the big giants in the space, but what's interesting is those giants have their own giants. And you talk a lot about it in your book, Guy. It's that it's not only your competitors, but some of those giants might be economic factors, cultural shifts, brand misperceptions because something that's going on. And so how do we work with giants in the space to help them overcome their own personal giants? It's a very exciting time, especially now. There are a lot of nervous people what's going on. Personally, I nerd out about the space right now because we don't know where it's going, and to try to get ahead of it and come up with those simple creative solutions, that's where agency partners such as ourselves really come into play.
Yeah, and I think it's not only creative nowadays in terms of, coming up with a great concept, the Aflac duck or whatever it happens to be, but it's also how, especially in digital, how you mix that creative concept with how you actually bring it to the audience. And
Yes.
and it's that combination of creativity on both sides that I think that can really make a difference.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I saw an article, and it's always interesting, when you hear people talk about data, and I'm a data-driven guy. My book is about data and building a marketing machine on using data to really help drive sales through what marketing does and using analytics. And there was an article in Media Post, and there were a couple of things which kind of stood out. And one was that that CMOs, 42% of the CMOs say that data can inhibit creativity, and then there's 41% that say exactly the opposite. And so how do you see that? So can data-driven companies, or do you see data-driven analytics really hindering, or do you see it helping creativity?
So it's interesting. One, it made me chuckle, that article, because 42% say one thing and 41% said another. So I wasn't really certain what the article was saying, except for the fact that marketers can never agree. The thing that I did when you shared that article with me is, I'm a bit of a word nerd, in that I have found through my career that different people define different words differently. And so the first thing I wanted to do is, what does creativity mean? And if you look at it, the definition of creativity is actually pretty dull. I'll read to you for a second. Defined as the tendency to generate or recognize ideas, alternatives, or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems, communicating with others, and entertaining ourselves and others. A rather dull definition, wouldn't you say? And then you have data, and that definition is factual information, such as measurements or statistics, used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. Well, when you combine those two things together, and yes, I'm pandering to the interviewer here. You have a whole section in your latest book around data, and how data doesn't necessarily mean dashboards. You have a whole section on that, and how data means what's going on in the world. It means competitors, like we just talked about. I'd love to explore a whole idea of how culture can be an important data point. And then you take that, and those are the data things. You need someone smart enough to distill that down, tell a story, and then spark creativity. So if you take what creativity, I believe we can all agree, creative is going back to what I said in the beginning of, what's the challenge that we're trying to solve? What's the objective that we're trying to achieve? And how do we go best doing it? And how do we make it different than everyone else? Well, data, if used correctly, if not just numbers, but other aspects are distilled down, you spark that creativity, then great ideas come out of that. In terms of the ones that say that it doesn't work, then my argument would be, then you don't have the right person distilling down the data and really bringing it to life in something that gets someone to be creative. There's nothing worse, Guy, than I call it blank paper syndrome. We all get in a room with all of these blank whiteboards and sticky notes, and an assignment brief, which assignment briefs are important, saying that we need to increase sales by 20%. Here's our budget. And we have demographic data, we're going after 35 to 55-year-old females. Okay, but what else? What makes this particular audience important, unique? What cultural factors are going on? What are the competitors doing? What's the win space? How can we really get the creative people in the room thinking creatively? That's when it works. And at the Johnson Group, we like to say that we dig for big. Well, we really dig into the insights and pull out something unique that no one else has thought of before. And then we come up with that creative idea to differentiate us or our partners from the rest of their competitors and really achieve those objectives.
Yeah, and I think to your point about understanding, well, first of all, the definition of creative versus the definition of data, but really, really good creative is also many times has the foundation of good data. And data doesn't necessarily mean I mean, of course it means numbers, but it doesn't necessarily mean
Right.
we sold 20 units last week and we're going to sell 21 this week and things like that. But when I think of data and great, absolutely great creative, I think back at the campaign for Real Beauty with Dove and with Unilever. And when they did the research, they came up with this concept of self-esteem for basically teenage girls and the lack that they have. And they then used that one piece of data and then really blew it out with their whole campaign for Real Beauty. And I think that is a great example where on the one hand, you're using the data, you're using the research, and then you're driving your creative based on that critical research.
And that's a key thing, Guy, because how many people, when they see the word data or they hear the word data, think numbers? There was no numbers in the Real Beauty insight. This is really understanding what's going on culturally in the world, and that was the beginning of this self-image of filters and just altering of what truly is real beauty, and really leaning into that to the point that now Dove is known for Real Beauty. You say Real Beauty, you think Dove. You don't think anybody else. And so they truly owned that space through a key insight, through that data point that wasn't actually a number.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they also transitioned that not only for the young, but also for, I don't know if I want to use the word old, because I don't consider myself old. But then they also had, be comfortable in the skin you're in. And all of those insights and all of that, and I just like you do, I call that data as well. That is just critical stuff to know. And then when you're putting that creative together to really understand how your consumers are, how the culture is affecting your consumers, how your advertising and messaging, right, and then how they are going to respond to that. I think that's really, really critical.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, well, let's change the topic here a little bit. So tell us, what's it like and what kind of advice would you give to a brand new client-side CMO?
Oh, yes. Well, first, no pressure, but brand new CMOs only last about 6 months. First-time CMOs only last about 6 months. So the biggest advice I would give to a first-time CMO is hire an executive coach. That is the first thing that you do. You're going to need that trusted sounding board to get you through it. Know that it's going to be fun. The first 30, 45 days, everybody's excited that you're there. They believe that you're going to solve a lot of things. Know that it's going to be hard. That second phase is truly hard because you are going to bring in new ideas that no one else has thought of. You are going to be investing in change. And sometimes that change impacts people and their jobs, your peers, your own boss, because your own boss has a preconceived notion of who you are and what he or she expects of you. And then even your own employees. You will, in order to make an impact, which you've probably been asked to do, you will have to make change, and change is hard, change is painful, change is stressful. But then the third thing is if you are confident in yourself, you take the time to hear people out, you do that bridge building, that consensus building, that storytelling, once you get through the hard part and over the other side, it's really a fabulous time. I have throughout my career, either both on the brand side and on the agency side, been considered that transformational leader, that growth leader. I'm usually not brought in to replace someone. I'm usually brought in to grow something, to change something. And that's really what I've seen. And I'm in that second phase at the Johnson Group now. And every single one of the people at the Johnson Group would say, love to have Teresa here, but change is hard. But I have learned and I have grown confident in the fact that once I get over that hump, it's really going to be smooth sailing from there, and very, very exciting.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting. I kind of think about a brand manager. If the brand manager is not bringing about change and disruption in the marketplace with the consumers of their brands, then they will most likely not be successful. If they're just going to go steady state, make no changes, then they're more or less on the way down. So they're incentivized to make changes. But the difference then for the CMO, especially a new CMO or a first-time CMO, is you're not only making changes on the outside, but you have to make changes on the inside, and making changes to the team and making changes to the broader team, which is the whole company. And those changes are very, very painful. So I really like your point. And I like your point as well about having an executive coach, because you finally have a person that you can really trust as a trusted advisor that doesn't have any skin in the game other than to make you successful. And that really makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting that you pointed out, Guy, that it is external change, but also internal change. I have found throughout my career, and it's no different now, is people focus on the work. How are you going to improve that deliverable itself? People forget that in order to improve upon that deliverable, you need to clear the way for those we just talked about creative. You need to clear the way for those people to do some great creative thinking. You need to set them up for success. You need to get them the right tools, which means really the first step of being successful is people, process, and plumbing, really evaluating those and getting them in the right place. That takes time. You may move as quickly as you can to get those fixed, but it's not fast enough. And so there'll be a lot of pressure for you to skip to the work itself. You use the Real Beauty example, and that CMO went on to Burger King and now he's gone on to do other things. I am a huge fan of his. Real Beauty was there before he got there. And it hadn't really taken off. Can you imagine the amount of pressure he must have been on to make that hugely successful? Burger King, the same thing. They took a risk to do something within the Burger King app so they could go up against McDonald's. From what I read, and obviously I wasn't there, nor was I lucky enough to be part of the agency, but it took over a year more of development. That's if we move slow, if we go slow to go fast, which is a great President Lincoln quote, now you're going to make an impact. And so going back to your original question of how do you become a successful CMO, stick to your guns. Be patient, be thoughtful, and also just make sure people come along for the ride. They understand what you are doing. You have all of those ingredients. That is a true recipe for success.
Yeah, and I like your one of the statistics you gave before for a new CMO, a first-time CMO, their average tenure is 6 months. I hadn't heard that one. Normally it's been over the last couple of years, maybe 24 months, I guess, for a seasoned CMO, and then maybe longer for a more seasoned CMO. And one of the interesting things about 6 months is if you're a new CMO and you only have 6 months tenure to be able to then prove yourself to get that 7th month, you're unfortunately inheriting everything that the guy before you was fired for.
Right.
And so you have to, your speed to make changes, significant and meaningful changes, you're really under the gun for that. Number one, and number two, you have to then at least if you can't make changes fast enough, and certainly bigger brands are harder to make changes very quickly, you have to then really develop that vision in the first 6 months so that you can buy that seventh month and that eighth month.
Yeah, I would argue that vision needs to be defined within the first couple of months. That's really going to be cute, and get everybody behind that vision and understanding the steps in that vision. You do not have a lot of time to do that. And you know, marketing is one of those things that we've always struggled with, and that everybody thinks that they can do marketing. You try to argue with an accountant, all of us know that we can't do accounting, but marketing, everybody feels like they can do it. And so everybody questions everything that you're doing. We've spoken, Guy, in past conversations about when budgets are cut, it's usually cut from marketing first. And so making sure, again, people, process, and plumbing, making sure your plumbing's in place. So when the CEO comes to you saying we need to cut $3 million, you can say very, very quickly and succinctly, well, based on this report, if you cut 3 million, you're going to impact X number of million in revenue. That's the plumbing piece. So making sure the right people are in place, making sure that there's the right process in place so those people can be successful, and making sure the plumbing's in place so you can be successful. You have the data, you have the information to show that you are making an impact on the organization. And if you or any member or any budget dollar goes away, there is a direct impact on the organization itself.
Yeah, and that is and that's kind of what our business is about, connecting marketing to selling, and connecting marketing to actual incremental sales, and that's a critical piece. And we used to work with Donna Peoples a long time ago when she was at Atlanta Gaslight. And she did exactly like what you're saying. The CEO came to her and said, listen, we need to cut $1 million out of your budget. And she says, okay, yeah, no problem. Then we need to cut, whatever it was, $20 million in sales out of the sales budget. And the CEO said, oh, we don't really do that.
Yeah, so, exactly.
So we went to the next C-suite, so to speak, and took it somewhere else. And, and it's funny too. It is really unfortunate that quite often companies think about cutting marketing first. And even now, with the hints of a recession and the hints of inflation, we're seeing that in the industry, where the marketers are then doing everything they can to defend their budgets, and realizing that even though maybe their effectiveness of their marketing might go down in a recession, it's still better than not doing the marketing at all. And that's a really critical argument for the whole marketing team.
Well, and it's so interesting that you use the Donna Peoples example. I've had similar experiences being on the agency side, where the agency budgets are cut and we're all disappointed and annoyed. And my point back to my team was, well, then we didn't do our job proving that we were making an impact, that we were just spending the client's money. And yes, it looked pretty, and we received a lot of engagement, but the numbers that mattered, we were looking at the metrics, the things that we tested and optimized and improved over time, but the numbers that mattered, the key performance indicators, we weren't rolling that back up and showing in a way that the CEOs understand and appreciate how that's going to make an impact. CEOs know that they need social media and they need to be engaging with their audiences, but when it comes down to tightening that belt and they're starting to ask why, it's like, okay, that was a nice to have, not a need to have. So that's not going away. Well, we all know intuitively as marketers that when that piece goes away, brand awareness goes away, we lose control of the brand perception message. We know that intuitively, but intuition doesn't pay the bills and doesn't get what the CEO needs for his or her board of directors. We need that definitive proof that when this goes away, then this will also go away. So why not get the pieces in place, get the plumbing in place, do the turning off, turning on tests before that actually happens, so you control the message before the message controls you.
Yeah, how true. And it's interesting that you you bring up the CEO and the board. So the CEO is coming to you and saying, well, what happens if we cut? And if, as the CMO or as the agency, if you don't have the answer that says, yes, let's cut $1 million out and we're going to lose 20 million in sales, the CEO needs that argument, because his job is just as much on the line when he goes to the board and says, well, yes, we're going to have to cut somewhere, but if we cut marketing, not only are we going to lose the 20 million, and then to your point as well, we're also going to lose the future, because you need marketing to not only drive sales in the short term, but you need marketing to drive sales in the future. And cutting off your brand investments is a sure way to then cut off that future that you might have once you come out of that recession.
Agreed. Right. Well said.
Absolutely. So yeah, great point. So so now switching topics just a little bit. So what kind of advice would you give to a female leader?
Oh, wow. Do we have a whole nother podcast, Guy?
We do. We could certainly continue this, but let's go from there and see what we've got.
It's so interesting being a female leader. So I'm a member of Chief, which is a for-profit organization, really focused on curating female leaders. You have to be an actual certain level of leader for a certain amount of years to be first invited, and then yes, it's a paid membership. I bring that up because yesterday we had this great, amazing session around executive presence, and what's fun about this is with Zoom you get to hear the presenter, but then you get to chat with everybody to the side, and it was really just an overall great dialogue. And what we were bringing up is how to be your authentic self, of how women are known to talk too much, or are squeaky voices, or we can't be heard, or we're too defensive, or we're too aggressive. And what she was recommending is really be your authentic self, which to a certain point I agree. But I also, because I've spent so much time in the agency and consulting world, I'm a big believer of mirroring that person as well. And so why do I bring up all of these things? It's really this idea of communication. As a female leader, as any leader, especially in the agency and consulting space, how you position yourself, how you hold yourself, how you communicate is incredibly important. I don't care if you're male or female, you can't come across as defensive. I don't care if you're male or female, you can't use crutch words or speak too quickly or use lingo. And really, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. If you work for me, I call it my taboo session. And all of my employees for past years are now laughing right now as they listen to me. We all sit in a room, they get to pick a topic that they can present on. It doesn't matter what it is, it can be something they're comfortable with, that they enjoy. And then it needs to be one of those, you know how it works, it's 20 slides, 5 minutes, and the slides automatically progress. And I get to be the person back in the room with the taboo button. The moment you start speaking too quickly, or you're using too many crutch words or lingo, I buzz you. And what was really interesting, it ended up being a guy. He got so frustrated with me that he was sarcastically slowing himself down, to the point that I stopped it and said, okay, now what does everybody think of this guy? And they said, wow, he sounds amazing. He sounds so authoritative. Yes, communication is key. I don't care if you're female or male. If you are going to be growing up in this business as an executive, you need to learn how to hold yourself. You need to take a position of authority, of confidence. The next time I hear a researcher interviewed on NPR, a female researcher interviewed on NPR about her research, and she says, I think, I will explode. Never say I think. She has spent 5 years doing this research. She knows it is what it is. It says it in the data. And so having that, taking that position of power is the number one thing that you can do. I don't care if you're male or female. So shifting more to a female perspective, yes, there are going to be things that either in reality or in perception, things like mansplaining and gaslighting and all of those kinds of areas, and you're going to be frustrated. Come up with techniques. There's a lot of great articles out there. Again, hire an executive coach, join a membership, and take lessons. There are techniques that you can use that, again, put you in a position of authority. You are going to have that mansplaining kind of thing, or someone who doesn't listen to your idea, but as soon as a guy says it, there's that perception that everybody's now listening to him. Well, use techniques to say, George, I'm really happy that you shined a spotlight on that idea that I just talked about. Let me even take that a step further and go back to these points I was saying. So that's, again, it may be my point number 2, but it does really come back to communication and communication style. And again, not being defensive, but going in with a position of authority and confidence. And, I think 3 is just find your people. Those people can be men. Those people can be women. I have found a lot of great mentors in men, a lot of great organizations. There's a great IBM example that I use that will bring me to my final point, Guy, on what to do is around this idea of having confidence in yourself. I attended an IBM session once, and IBM's doing a really great job in cultivating their female leaders. And one of those leaders, a man, tells a story about how he had a job opening. And it really came down to 2 people, a man who had maybe enough experience and a woman that if you checked all the boxes, she checked every single one of the boxes, and they are both up for this position. The woman just happened to be part of this cultivating female leaders program. So she had a mentor, and this leader comes back to the mentor and says, let me explain to you what just happened. The guy came in and said, I can do this job. Here's the skill set I have. This is how it translates. Uber confident, was all in. He can do it. The woman came in and said, I don't know. Am I ready? Do I really have all the skill set? Maybe I need a couple more years of experience. That happens time and time again. We keep saying that we want equal rights, that we want equal opportunity. Well, we are now being given equal opportunity. And in many times, because of our imposter syndrome, our self-doubt, we don't take it. There's been females that I have given opportunities to even recently, and those females didn't take it because they didn't think they were ready. And that's an issue, and we really need to work on those issues.
Yeah, and I have seen that, and unfortunately I have seen that so many times where so as an example, and this kind of gets outside of marketing, but my son's big into climbing, and he rented this movie, and the movie had individuals doing some really interesting climbing feat, a rock wall or a bridge or a this or a that. And the men were just confident and say, well, there's going to be a problem here, a problem there, but I think I know how to get around it. And the women were exactly like you're saying, is I don't know if we can do this. They
Yes.
often tried it, but the first thing out of their mouth was that lack of confidence. And
Right.
it's I don't know what causes that, but you would think that in college or something, or maybe even in high school, somebody has to then have a thing that says, okay, women, you have to do this, and you have to show confidence. Now the men, of course, we're faultless except for all these other faults, and we need the same kind of thing except different. And
Right.
That
Exactly.
confidence piece that you're talking about, I hate to say it, I think you're right. It unfortunately happens to where you have a woman that is much more qualified, and yet they do have that reticence to say that, yes, I'm ready to it. So
Yes. Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. So if any of your listeners are female and would like some mentoring, please reach out to me. You can find me on all the social medias.
yeah, and be honest with you, as part of the AMA, the American Marketing Association here in Atlanta, I've been a mentor, I don't know, for 3 or 4 years now, and I think it's the most fun thing that I do to help young marketers, both male and female, and that's one of the big things as well. And So, and even, whether it's your own employees or whether it's outsiders like mentees or whatever, I think helping people to get that confidence that yes, they can do the job, and okay, they may have some doubts on one area, but yes, go for it, go for it, go for it. So
right. Well, and shout out to AMA and the mentor mentee program. Shout out to Joanne Harold. She was my mentor. I was, again, I'm going to date myself. I was in marketing. So I had figured out that I wanted to do marketing. And I was at the fax machine. And at that time, AMA was faxing its announcements for its mentor mentee program. And I right away, I've always been taught to work with mentors. I don't know if it was something my father taught me or something. And right away I signed up for it. And I actually wasn't assigned Joanne initially. I was given another mentor, and we did this, I think it was some kind of volunteer event, and we switched because the guy I was with was better with someone else and Joanne was better for me. And I am here today because of those opportunities that Joanne opened me up to, and the coaching and counseling that she has given to me throughout the years.
Yeah, she's definitely a great person to have as a mentor, and so
yes,
congratulations. That's so fantastic that she was able to help you.
Yes.
Wow. So we've talked about kind of the new CMOs and what their challenges are, and we've talked about female leaders. There's one other dimension that goes into marketing, and that is the pace of change. And I like to say, it's not just that change is happening all the time, it's that accelerated change is now happening all the time. The time between a new technology and a new capability seems to be shortening and shortening. And I think the good news is that leaves a lot of opportunity for marketers that can figure out how to use it early on. But just staying up with that. So what do you recommend to the marketing leaders today in terms of how they should handle the disruptive technologies and the new technologies that are streaming right in front of them?
Well, and I would say don't panic. Just because we're using the word disruptive doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be fast. If we think about personally identifiable information, because when you asked me to answer this question, Guy, I started doing some research on a lot of the latest technologies out there that are sometimes in some ways helping marketers and other ways hurting marketers, and this whole idea of haves and have nots. And I reached out to my CTO about this to see what he was thinking of, and he brought up AdGuard and Pi-hole, and I wasn't going to use the examples, but I like the opportunity of being able to say Pi-hole on your podcast. So I love this company named their company Pi-hole. All of you will not forget what it is. But what it is, just before I move on, but these are companies that are blocking client-side tracking implementations and forcing companies to go server-side. It's this whole idea of what does a third-party cookieless future look like that's become sort of this tagline. Well, this is something, and again, dude, people are going to think I am so old after listening to this podcast, but do you remember in 1999, the DoubleClick and Abacus merger that happened? Yes. And in 2000, all the lawsuits began. That's when I started at Razorfish, and Razorfish, because of the Drive, so Drive PM, Razorfish, and a third company that is I'm forgetting, but really because Drive PM was so focused on cookie-based tracking, and then you had Razorfish that was focused on using that tracking, and because of Abacus and DoubleClick, there was a lot of urgency around not connecting PII with the cookies. Well, you fast forward to today, 2 decades later, and that's really what's happening, and it's become so easy to do that. And with great ease and great actually results comes great power, and it is used for nefarious purposes. And so now the government's having to catch up and put in different kinds of things like GDPR. Well, GDPR, I don't know if you saw the latest article, but a lot of the GDPR guidelines are going to be rolled back, and there's expected to be £1 billion savings for these companies because the amount that's been put on them. So it's 2 decades, but it's a lot. And there's a lot to think about and a lot of work to be put in place. We were going to have complete no third-party cookies. Thankfully, we got a little bit of a respite there. But if you think about it, it's really only Google left. A lot of the others, Safari, Firefox, have already gotten rid of this. So we say disruption, but there is many times there is a bit of time to catch up. You just can't wait, because if you do wait, then it is going to be sudden, it is going to be expensive, and it is going to be a wildfire that you're going to need to put out. So to get back to your original question around what should marketers do, marketers should be looking out to the future as much as they can. They should be looking at the past and saying, what can we learn from the past? And then they should be applying that to the future. An example of past to future is if you look at Google. When I grew up, Google was big search engine optimization, all algorithms, all organic traffic. That was 100% of what they did. And that's still very much in play today. Heck, there's whole SEO agencies focused on that. But at one point, Google realized that they could charge people and they could do paid advertising. And so then paid became a big part of the algorithm. Fast forward to Facebook. Well, those of us that went through the Google could see what was going to happen with Facebook, with Twitter, Pinterest. Every time one of those social media platforms comes out and says they're not going to do paid, don't believe them. And so learning from the past and applying that to the future will help you be prepared for the future. Seeing that Firefox and Safari have eliminated cookies, and I'm going to have to fact check. I believe I'm correct on that, right, Guy?
That's what I understand, yeah.
Yeah, so knowing that they've already done that, doesn't that lead you to believe that Google's going to be doing the same? And so thinking about where you're supposed to be going in order to address that, don't wait, because what feels like disruptive isn't necessarily disruptive. You're starting to see the signs. COVID, with people wanting to actually order food and get it delivered to you, companies had been starting to prepare for that. And thankfully companies like churches had already hired people like Alan to actually fix that. Now, Alan's budget went from a nice to have to, oh my goodness, fix it now. But Ken, disruptive isn't as disruptive as we think it is. Disruptive is only truly disruptive and equaling urgent if we let it be that way. We need to always be looking at the past and figuring out how it will impact our future.
Well, that's an interesting point. I do like that. But so does that then mean that the marketing leader, the CMO, needs to have a function which is marketing technology, so that someone, maybe it's not a full-time, or maybe it is for a larger brand, but somebody then that is really tracking and making certain that the company is staying up to date with whatever those changes in technologies are going to be?
Well, traditionally, that's been why agencies still exist. Every time there's articles going out saying that agencies are going to go away, I'm hesitant to say that that's a good idea. Yes, will your partnership with your agency shift? Should agencies, so let's use an agency example, the commoditization of social media, community management. Brands are going to figure out that it's a lot less expensive to hire a $55,000, $60,000 resource to do the day-to-day community support for their social media and not hire an agency. But agencies, from a strategic perspective, need to be those partners to help prepare their brands. I've been saying for several years now, what are the steps you're taking in order to prepare for this cookieless future? Let's get your first party data all in one place. Let's consolidate your data, your customer data, into one warehouse. Let's start considering CDPs. Let's start looking at these things. I've been talking about that since I've been at Atlanticus, because I knew it was coming. And so let's prepare for it. So we have several years to prepare for it, not, okay, it's time and Google's going away and your advertising that you've been depending on was now out the window. And so that's where agencies, not to be self-serving because I lead an agency, but that's what you should expect your agency partners to do, is to be that person that helps you look across your space, look at culture and competitors and all those areas. It's also easier for us to do it because we don't deal with the same people every day. We're looking across many different industries, many different clients. So we actually have the benefit of different things coming to us, different questions being asked, different perspectives versus having to do that one set of things every day.
Yeah, interesting, and that is a great point in terms of having the agencies to be the external experts, because, and that's one of the challenges that we have as well, and I'm sure you have it as well, is that we can have analysts working for us, and we could then be, you know, brought in house, or they could do our work, they could do it in house, but those analysts in house won't get the exposure that the agency person would have, because the agency person, just like our team, they're working across multiple clients, across multiple industries and different challenges. And it's that advantage that we bring, and certainly for an agency, and certainly then for this element of following and tracking technology, is definitely something that the technologists within the agency can really shine, as opposed to trying to do that internally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're about towards the end here, and
Okay.
we could go on for hours, and I've always enjoyed talking with you, Teresa. One thing I do want to mention to the audience, my first book, which is over my shoulder right there, Teresa was one of my first editors, my first beta reader, and she gave some really great advice, and I will never forget that, and I'm always thankful for that. And since that book, I've now written 4 more. So this last one is my 5th book on marketing, and I think it really is something that really helps, or can help, marketers to improve their overall operations and prove then that they're delivering on the success that they have been charged with. So before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to mention, or any comments that we left off, or anything that comes to mind?
So a few things. One is Guy has been a great mentor and partner to me throughout the years. Go ahead and look at that book and see when that was, and look at my LinkedIn profile. I was a little itty bitty marketing manager back then. I thought I knew it all. I'm realizing all these years later I didn't. But that Guy has been someone who has been a persistent part of my life, and a big part of helping me think through marketing, return on marketing investment, all of those areas. So again, going back to your question about female leaders, and any leader for that matter, having that partner in lots of different areas is incredibly important. So that's number one. Number two, again, pandering to the interviewer, I was able to read Guy's book while I was traveling for volleyball this week, and it will be something that I ask. So surprise, guys, the analytics and strategy team, this is going to be required reading and discussion group. I really love this version of Guy's book because of that aspect that we covered quite thoroughly earlier in this interview around the fact that data isn't just numbers. Data is research, it's insights, it's telling that story in order to spark creativity, in order to make sure that when the CEO comes to prove your budget, so she can go then back to her board and prove it to the board, making sure you have those pieces in place. All of those things are so important. And then my hope is that at some point we can go back and have another discussion, Guy. I believe you and I talked a lot about traditional versus digital and full funnel, to really put a bow on that. As you know, we sum things up for your listeners, is Guy and I talked a lot about agencies and brands and the partnership. We also talked about people, process, plumbing. If you are a new leader, do your best to break down the silos. Traditional is now becoming digital. Full funnel, this idea of awareness and perception and that impact and how it makes performance-based marketing. We have grown up in these silos, and the silos have gotten worse. And we need to make sure to break down those silos to truly become integrated. So if there's one big takeaway you come from this interview is really look at your current organization and see how can you make it more integrated and more of an integrated approach so you can set yourself up for success?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you so much for the endorsement. I really appreciate it. You've also been a great person to bounce ideas off of over the years, and really always appreciate your input. But to your point though about the data silos, one of the things that marketing analytics, if done right, and there's a lot of people that don't do it right, it has to break down the silos, because
Yes.
to your point, it's not just the consumer data and the consumer research that is a data point, or the other activities in the environment that are taking place, but it's also getting data from sales, from marketing, from operations, from customer service, whatever it happens to be, and having that clean data across the entire organization is really the best way you can get the best results, so you can really drive the business forward.
Agree wholeheartedly. Well said.
Thank you. So yeah, Teresa, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And with that, let me close. So you can find more about the Johnson Group at johnsongroup.com, johnsongroup.com. That's where Teresa is now leading the charge and slaying those dragons. And otherwise, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on marketing. Please visit marketingmachine.prorelevant.com to download this blog, and you can also see it on popular podcast providers such as Apple, Spotify, and many others. And if you do that, please rate it 5 stars, and I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, thank you. And Teresa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy.